as we touched upon in the last lesson, there is a distinction between a valid argument and a sound argument. So what we're going to do in this particular lesson is look at what this distinction is. So we're going to outline the distinction between the two, and what we're going to do is explain why one argument may be valid and why another argument may be sound. So we already noted what it takes for something to be a valid argument. We already noted that a valid argument is where if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. The premises logically entail the conclusion. You can, it's almost like a path, okay? It's like a path that takes you to the conclusion. There's no way in which, if you follow this path, the path being the different premises, you won't end up at the conclusion. Think of it like that. So we looked at the example in the last lesson that premise 1, all men are immortal. Premise 2, Socrates is a man. Therefore, the conclusion is Socrates is immortal. If this was a winding path with the two premises along the way, and we follow this argument through, we go from top to bottom, we follow this argument through, and we accept each premise. If we do that, we will always end up at the end of the path, which would be the conclusion that Socrates has to be immortal if these two premises are true. And that's what makes an argument valid. That's what makes this argument valid. But the conclusion is true just because the premises are true. However, in the example that we just looked at, the premises in reality aren't true. Okay? Specifically, premise 1 isn't. Premise 1 being all men are immortal. You could make the argument that premise 2 is false because it's referring to Socrates being a man in the present tense when in fact he's dead, so it would be the past tense, so it should be Socrates was a man. However, for the sake of simplicity, let's assume that it's just premise 1 that is false, which is all men are immortal. We know that this premise isn't true because we know that no man is immortal, that no one lives forever. So in reality, while the argument is logically valid, the premises do lead to the conclusion. Okay, this cannot be what we call a sound argument because the premise here is false. But the argument is still valid. Don't forget that the argument is still valid on this under this presumption. But this brings into the question what makes an argument sound. Well, an argument is sound just so long as it satisfies two requirements. The first requirement is the argument has to be valid, so that's the first requirement that it has to be. And then the second requirement is the premises within the argument have to be true. Now, the vast majority of philosophy and other kinds of argumentation academically, the first requirement is normally always satisfied. It's very difficult for you to find an argument that is not valid, because it's easy to make an argument valid, but what's less difficult is to make an argument valid and make it so the premises are true. Someone will always disagree with you about whether or not the premises are true. So the argument we've just looked at won't be sound, but it will still be valid. So what we can do to make it sound, let's make it a sound argument. We could say that all men are mortal and that Socrates is a man, and so therefore Socrates is mortal. This argument is not just logically valid. We've already noted that this is what we call a syllogism. It has an umbrella premise, the first premise, and then it has a specific reference premise, one where it places an individual entity within this umbrella premise, and so therefore we conclude whatever the umbrella premise is saying. All men are mortal, Socrates is a man, Socrates is mortal. That is the premise and conclusion argument. And so obviously the premises are also true in reality, because all men are mortal, and Socrates being a man, we know that to be true, and so therefore the conclusion Socrates is mortal, this is a perfectly valid and perfectly sound argument. And so also it should be noted that if the premises are true, then the conclusion is also true. Okay, so if we can if we have an argument like this, and we have an argument that is valid like this, the majority of the debate will be, well, whether or not the premises are true. That's where the debate will take place. You have to prove that the premises are true by, bringing evidence forward. If I wanted to prove that these premises are true, I would just note to, I'll bring evidence of all the different, death certificates from all of human history that notes that there has not been a single man to ever cheat death at any period in history. Okay, and then to prove premise 2, I should just simply reference, ancient scripts to make the claim that Socrates is a man. There is no indication that he's not a man. Okay, and or look at all the paintings and look at all the sculptures of Socrates. He's definitely a man in this example. And so those two things here will sufficiently prove that these two premises are true, and so therefore I can prove sufficiently that Socrates is mortal by this definition. So now we've described what a logically valid argument is and what a sound argument is. We're going to do in the next lesson is look at what the something called the substitution principle, a way in which we can substitute premises while still retaining logical validity.